Ancient Fungi, Modern Magic, The Story of Koji. 7 years ago, Elena literally ran into a patch of chanterelle, which, while working in the Palo Alto area. She's a very smart person, so naturally, she joined the MSSF, began attending forays and meetings, and learned a lot about mushrooms. The question of what to do with all those mushrooms led to making wonderful fermentations using koji and mushrooms and other forage stuff, I guess. And that ultimately led to opening shared cultures. The rest is history. I have her matsutake and morel miso in the refrigerator and can attest to just how good they are. Please, before I welcome Elena in, when we're done, we get a little help putting the chairs back, please? So that said, welcome, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hi. This is fun. My name's Elena. I've been to a few meetings here, and actually fun story that I like to share is that I got started making koji and all these things at home. And the first incubation chamber was Maria helped pull it off on the street with me like 7, 8 years ago, before when I first started. So I'll be talking a little bit about how to grow koji. And the first chamber I ever used, it was after a MSSF meeting that I found my first incubation chamber with the help from Maria, and we hauled it back home, and that's how I kind of started my business. So a lot of good memories with MSSF, and also even my first presentation, actually. I think it was like maybe 8 or 9 years ago at Mendo Camp. It was late night. And that was the first time I even presented on anything. And I remember I was so nervous because talking about koji and all these things that I was passionate about, and with a room with people who really understood fungi on a much deeper level, was a little intimidating. And but yeah, I can't believe that was 7, 8 years ago, and now I'm here. So I'm here to talk to you guys about koji. And what's really fun for me today is that most of the talks that I've ever heard or been in the room with MSSF usually go talk about fruiting bodies or tree identification. And what's really fun today is that we can talk about something that's a little bit different, but still related to fungi. So what's really cool about koji is it's been around for over 2,500 years, almost 3,000 years. And we know this from pottery records. When people think about fermentation, oftentimes, or when people think about evolution or how people have kind of evolved throughout time and survival, people always think about hunting and gathering. But very little people talk about fermentation and how that role in fermentation of changing, let's say, water that's not so drinkable into potable water, like wine or rice wine and things like that, or preserving, milk into cheese. Fermentation has been around for so long, and it's been essential for human survival. So, not just man and fire and hunting and gathering, but fermentation is a big part of that story. And what's really interesting about koji is that we know that 3,000 years ago, they were using this fungi because they have records from the dynasties back then. And just like how in today's modern kitchens, you have a tasting menu, you have a pantry list. A lot of those records are still here today, showing what a lot of these chefs in China were cooking for some of the royalty back then. But a lot of these ferments, or a lot of these flavors that they were fermenting with, were not necessarily vegetable based. They were mostly animal based, and it was whatever they could capture and kill. So whether it was rabbits or reptiles and birds and even rats, right, like rodents, anything that had protein was fair game. So I'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. And yeah, I'm really excited to get started. So a little bit about our business is that we use similar to 3,000 years ago, people were just using what they had back then. We do the same with our small business. We just use local beans and things that we get from the farmers market. We ferment seasonally. We use what we have here in the Bay Area to create these amazing flavors. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I have to slide up. Okay, so people always ask us how we got started. It's actually just a photo of me and my partner Kevin, and it started from our love of mushrooms. Back then, Kevin and I were actually working desk jobs, and we met in Palo Alto. And I remember I was actually pretty depressed at work. I hated what I did. And the only way for me to get through the day was to actually go out in the woods. And I would go for a morning run before work in Woodside. And then I'd go for a nighttime run after work. And to be honest with you, I was paying so much money in Palo Alto at that time for rent that I couldn't afford to do anything anyway. So being in the woods was like my only one of the biggest joys in my life. And I like to say on one of those occasions, the chanterelle mushrooms found me. They were this bright, beautiful patch of yellow mushrooms. I'd never paid attention to mushrooms before. I've always been the type of person to just the out and back, quickly go up the hill as fast as possible, go back down, back to my car sort of situation. And I've never paid attention to mushrooms until that morning. And I remember these chanterelles, they were underneath this oak tree. And for those of you, I'm sure you guys are all familiar, chanterelles are funny because to me, they seem to have, especially the formosas, they kind of have this little bonnet cap that they wear. I kind of look at it like a little beret almost, and they always curl up. And every single chanterelle is kind of different, and especially when they're tiny. And I still remember the first chanterelles I found. They had this silly little cap on them, and they made me so happy. And I remember not knowing what they were, but just knowing that they gave me a lot of joy during a time of darkness. And I ran down the hill with them in my shirt, like kind of like a little pocket. And I went to the Palo Alto Library and I realized that night that they were edible. And they were the same type of mushrooms that I've seen at the farmers markets in downtown Palo Alto that I frankly could not afford. And I was so excited to actually cook them up and eat them. And they were delicious. And from there, I was actually, I like to say the mushrooms like saved my life in some ways because it totally course corrected the direction that I was going in. And I started feeling very motivated to find mushrooms simply because the serotonin rush, as you guys all might know something about, you get so happy when you find a patch, and and for me, it was not just the moment of finding the mushrooms. It was also those little joys of like understanding and learning about the trees, and then also then learning about the mushrooms, and then trying to find the mushrooms that I was looking for. It was like little problem solving, but every single time there was a reward if I kept looking. And you become extremely happy when you can find them and then identify them and then eat them and then learn, and the cycle keeps going. But for me, after a while, I didn't know what to do with all the mushrooms I was finding, to be honest with you. Because, if you stumble upon a really great patch, there's only so much mushroom salts you can do. I made a lot of pickled chanterelles for a while. I didn't know what to do with everything. So that's when I went back to the library and I checked out the book, The Art of Fermentation by Sandra Katz. And that's actually how this journey started, was Sandra Katz had talked about this fungi Koji that's been around for 3,000 years, and how its ability to break down proteins into amino acids, into umami, really got the wheels spinning for me. And I started thinking like, yeah, mushrooms, some mushrooms have higher, sources of protein than others, but they do have protein in them. And wouldn't it be interesting to ferment that into flavor? And that's kind of how the whole journey started. So, as you guys, for me, I started thinking about fermenting these mushrooms, and I was talking a little bit about protein, but the reason why things that are fermented with koji are so delicious and are so unique is because koji, this fungi, secretes enzymes. So just like how fruiting body mushrooms secrete enzymes in the woods, or they decompose and break down their environment that they're growing in the forest, koji does the exact same thing, except it likes to, instead of breaking down wood, it likes to, or an organic material, koji likes to break down starches into sugars, and then proteins into amino acids, which is umami. So if you were to think about soy, like soy milk, for example, or edamame, it's very, very bland. But why is soy sauce and miso so umami? And on the other hand, if you were just to have a grain of rice, it tastes very plain, but if why is sake, or, so alcoholic, right? And it's because sake, koji is actually the main ingredient in sake. It's the primary ingredient, really. And it's because koji's enzymes are breaking down the starches into sugar, and the sugar then gets converted into alcohol. So prior to that fermentation, it actually is called amazake. So the koji is grown on the rice. It gets fed more starch, and that starch turns into sugar, which turns into this one product called amazake. You can actually buy it in some of the, like, if you ever go to Japan, the 7-Eleven stores, they have them, and Nijiya has them as well. But it's this very, very sweet drink. I make it for fun myself. But then from there, if you were to pitch a little bit of yeast, that would then eat up all the sugar and turn into alcohol. So it's really incredible, all of the enzymes it secretes. And this is a picture of koji being grown on rice. You can really grow koji on anything as long as it has some sort of starch or some sort of protein source. And what you're seeing here is basically the mycelium. So it's not you don't see the fruiting body, but you do see the mycelium that's covered the substrate. And there's two types of fermentation. The first stage is the solid state fermentation, where you're turning something into koji. So from here, like I've turned rice into koji rice. You can turn it into koji beans, or, koji Cheerios, whatever you prefer. And then you would take that koji that you've made and turn it into a secondary fermentation. So that would be soy sauce, for example. That could be miso, that could be sake. And in my world, those definitions, the definition of soy sauce it can be varied. Like I make a soy sauce, but I make mine with lentils and quinoa instead of soy and wheat. So you can really make any type of miso or soy sauce as long as there's some sort of protein present in them that you're growing the koji on. And people who are unfamiliar with koji, you've already had it if you've had soy sauce, miso, rice vinegar, and sake. And what's funny is, growing up, I didn't know any of this. I've always thought soy sauce, growing up in San Francisco as an Asian American, or just as an American in general. I used to think soy sauce was just like ketchup and mustard. I never really thought about it. I also never thought about how it was made. I've always just thought, oh yeah, they just mix it together and it's in the bottle and you squeeze it out, or you go to the Panda Express growing up and it comes in a little packet. But I never realized it was a fermented product until actually into my late 20s, which is kind of shocking to me, like that I never thought about it. But similar to, I think a lot of people don't, like, how's Worcestershire sauce made? I don't know, you don't know until you learn. Um, so here I talked a little bit about the history of Koji, but this was actually the first written record that is, for those who are interested in the book, during the Zhao dynasty, where they were actually recording the tasting menus, and a lot of the chefs were required to actually keep logs of what was present in their pantries, and that's how I learned that they were fermenting all these amazing animal proteins. And what happened was, in China back in the day, there was a big population boom. So if you could think that, there's so many people, how can we feed everybody? And so instead of animals, it was decreed that soybeans were to be planted instead of farming animals. And this was the same time that the wheel was invented. So soybeans became the primary way to feed the mass population growth. And from there, the ferments naturally progressed from animal proteins to then soybean proteins. And the reason why we're all familiar with miso and soy sauce with just being soy as the primary ingredient is because the Japanese were the ones to really perfect the craft. And in Japan, they're very traditional. So they always do it the same way for generations. It never changes because they're very rigid in tradition. And that's just even when I was in Japan in 2022, just to even help out at a miso factory, I asked a lot of questions and I would ask like, oh, why do you do it? And they're like, well, my great 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 grandfather did it like this. So like this is why I do it. But I'm like, but isn't there a better way to do it? Or isn't there a more efficient way? They're like, well, no, that there's it, there isn't a better or more efficient way to do it because the best way to do it is how my great 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 grandfather did it to and that's in some ways I thought was very interesting because they're able to preserve these amazing traditions, but also they have a hard time moving forward because they're so stuck in making the things that are the traditional way, you know. And I actually had a lot of conversation about that when I was in Japan because it is a problem. I think in Japan these days that people are having a hard time modernizing or moving forward in some aspects. But anyways, and so that's actually why all of us know miso and soy sauce to be soy ingredients because the Japanese, what happened was this traveling monk from China brought this very it was almost like a really runny soy sauce or like a really or no sorry a really runny miso or a really thick soy sauce. It was one ferment, and the Japanese monks took this ferment from the visiting Chinese monk and turned it into two ferments. They pressed it, and so that's how soy sauce came to be, and that's how miso came to be. And so they were the ones to really really perfect it, and that's actually how soy sauce became one thing and then miso became another. Um, and here I have a few photos of how what Koji looks like. And in 24 hours, it kind of looks like powdered sugar. 48 hours, the mycelium has really taken over and it forms a cake. 72 hours, it looks like it's sporulated, similar to how you'd be walking in the woods and the mushroom is way past it's way far gone. It's the same idea. This picture at 72 hours, it's so far gone that it's starting to spread its spores and decomposing. And at that point, you could technically harvest the spores to make more koji, but I don't do that because I fear that there's so much work involved in all of this, as I will later talk about, that it doesn't make sense to harvest spores from an existing batch because I worry about intergenerational breeding between the spores that could cause some sort of problems and mutations down the line. And because it takes me 4 days to make the koji, it just doesn't make sense. So I always start from scratch. Um, so I talk a lot about this, and again, it really just goes back to the enzymes. The enzymes are what give us flavor. So I talked a little bit about protease, I believe, and amylase. So protease is the enzyme that is grown at this temperature range, 80 to 90. And that's what breaks down the proteins into amino acids, which gives us flavor. And then amylase breaks down the starches and the sugars. And then there's also lipase, which is an enzyme that Koji also produces. And it's grown at it's cultivated at a lower temperature. And what's really interesting about this is actually found in a lot of our commercial laundry detergents, except these laundry detergent companies grow koji on a mass scale in these liquid biotanks, and it's what helps break down the fats on our clothing and the oil stains. So there are other ways besides culinary that koji is used. So this is a photo of our koji. It takes 48 hours. We grow it at 86 degrees. We mix it at 24 hours to break up the heat. It's a living, breathing thing. So within a day of you starting to inoculate and grow, it actually starts to breathe life and starts generating its own heat, which is really interesting. So breaking it up in between is really important. And we use this really great rice that's grown just 2 hours from San Francisco. Um, that's for those of you who are not familiar, Koto Farms, it's a third generation Japanese American rice grower. So we try to really emphasize on using local products. So this is a list of things that Koji needs to thrive. And it's very similar to growing mushrooms, if some of you guys are familiar with mushroom cultivation. But I think it's a little bit easier because instead of sterilizing everything, I just need to clean the pan that I'm growing the Koji on. I don't need to do a whole chamber situation. And so it has to be clean. You have to make sure whatever you want to grow it on is accessible. Because Koji is a mold fungi, or it's like the mycelium really needs air pockets to really spread, to be able to go in and like spread itself throughout the substrate. It's important that it's accessible. So making sure that, for example, I'll talk a little bit about how to prepare the substrate, like the rice that I grow, but it needs those air pockets in order for it to really thrive. And if, for example, like there is some people want to grow it on brown rice or things that have a hole outside, it's important to soak the substrate the night before so the grain is fully hydrated so that the mycelium can go in there and penetrate through that hole. And the hole will then get softened. The mycelium can then go in and really penetrate the grain to really thrive. And it also needs to be hot and humid. So this is a photo of actually our first shared commercial kitchen space from a few years ago, but we still use the exact same setup. It's funny because we grow about 300, 250 or 275 pounds of koji in one batch. And some people use like these really fancy like ovens, but we just use dim sum steamers and it works really, really well. We got them from the Asian um, um, like appliance store, the Wame on Clement, and we've been using them ever since. And what's really amazing is that they can actually steam a lot of rice in them. So we have, in this photo, you see that there are 2 steamers. We actually have 3, and with 3 steamers, we have 6 trays going at once. And all 6 trays can do about 125 pounds in one round, which is really, really cool. So we soak the rice the night before and then we steam it for 45 minutes. And then at minute 22, we have a timer. We switch the top and the bottom to make sure that they're evenly steamed. And the reason why we steam the substrate is because going back to air pockets, if you can imagine rice being grown or being cooked at home in a rice cooker or in a donabe, the rice is sitting underneath in a pool of water, and that water is very starchy, and it doesn't allow the rice to as it's cooking, it basically buddies up against each other, right? So when you take rice out of the rice cooker or the pot, the rice is nice and sticky and they're all stuck together. But with koji, you don't want that. If you're trying to grow something like a mold fungi on substrate, you want to make sure that each grain of rice is actually individual so that it has those air pockets. So that's why we steam the rice for 45 minutes. And the reason why we actually grow our koji on rice is because we like the sweetness it imparts. So if you wanted to, you could grow it on beans, for example, and that would give it a very deep, rich umami flavor. But we like the sweetness it imparts, and we actually do the secondary fermentation with beans. But let's say a lot of people ask, oh, like, why haven't you done fruit misos before? And it's not that I just don't have time, but if people who are interested or who are listening want to do a fruit miso, I would grow the koji on the beans and then ferment the fruit, because then the beans have the amino or the protein aspect, and then it would feed on the starch in the fruit. And so that would be a really nice like balance. But for me, because currently I grow all my koji on rice, it's already very sweet. So I need something savory to have it be nice and balanced. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And so after I steam the rice for 45 minutes, I basically cool it down on a tray and then I inoculate with the spores. So if people are listening, if you want spores, I sell them for $5 on my website. You can grow 5 pounds of koji with one bag. You know, it's pretty incredible. Depending on, I think the key is then trying to figure out what kind of chamber you want to use. So I talked a little bit about my chamber earlier, but in the next slide, I'll have a few pictures of examples. And I always encourage people, if you want to grow this stuff at home, try to not buy anything, especially if we're all mushroom foragers here. A lot of us should have dehydrators. Use the dehydrator that you have, especially if it's like an Excalibur or one with a door. The Nesco ones don't really work really well because you kind of need to have, I like to put a tray of water in the Excalibur. I actually have a brand called Try Best, and it's the same kind of situation when you open the door. But putting a tray of water in there really helps counteract the dehydrating effects. Or it's really hard to do it in a Nesco where you stack the dehydrator. But a bread proofer works really well. I've also used the oven for those of you who have a gas pilot light on, a pilot light, a gas operated stove. You can leave the pilot light on and try to feel around and see where the hottest place in your oven is. And that's a really good place to grow koji. It takes a little bit longer, but it can be done. Um, and then lastly, I also recommend a lot, kind of like a plastic box, a bin that you would typically store your Christmas decorations in, and just from Target, and flipping that box upside down and creating a hot box situation. You could put like a seedling warming mat in there, or a little reptile heater in the corner. Just something warm, water bottles for when your tummy hurts. You know, you could use that to wrap around. You just want to keep it nice, warm, and humid. And having a hot towel in there could also work as well. So here are some of my chamber suggestions. This is the old wine fridge that Maria helped pull of 8 years ago. I actually still have it at home, but I'm thinking about getting rid of it now since we've actually don't grow anything at home anymore. But this was a really, really great first start. I remember being able to grow 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds of koji in here, which was a really, really nice batch size, because the initial batches we made were maybe 20 pounds to start. That was like a lot for me. And then I think we graduated to 50 pounds for per flavor. And this was also still very good for that. And now it's crazy to think that we're at like 450 pounds per batch, which is insane. The chamber that I use, I'll show in the next slide. It's very similar to this old wine fridge that we use. Essentially, what the wine fridge does is, or a refrigerator does, is there is a reptile heating lamp on the bottom, and it's plugged in to a temperature control, which I'll show at the next slide. And you can program it to 86 degrees or whatever temperature you want to grow at. And as the koji is growing, the reptile lamp is turned on to heat the chamber up. And then as soon as it reaches the ideal temperature range, the fridge then kicks on to cool it down. So it's always a very controlled environment. During the pandemic, I started my business during the pandemic, and a lot of you guys might have been really into fermenting as well, or making sourdoughs and yogurts. I know I was, in addition to everything else I was doing. So I did ended up buying one of these Broad and Taylor bread proofers, which I actually really still use to this day, except I use it to make yogurt at home. But this is really great because it's basically a temperature controlled hot box. And this is my dehydrator that I have used. So very similar to Excalibur, but putting a tray of water on the bottom and wrapping your koji tray, the inoculated rice or whatever your substrate is, with some plastic and poking some holes really helps trap in the moisture. Okay, so this is our chamber that I still use today. And this is the the temperature controller that I was talking about. You can get it for $35 on Amazon. And this is just a working commercial refrigerator. So it's just like the wine fridge, but scaled up for our purposes. And what's really great is that in a place like San Francisco, space is at such a premium. And in Japan, they have dedicated rooms called murals for this stuff where they grow all these things in a dedicated, very small room. It's the ceiling is actually not very high. You have to kind of like duck in to get in because the higher your ceiling, the more heat is wasted on top. So you kind of crawl into this space, and it's this concentrated hot box basically that's very humid in there that all the koji grows in. But in San Francisco, I don't have that luxury of having my own little room, and so we've always grown it in this refrigerator, and it's worked very, very, very well. Um, yeah, so in 24 hours, I talked a little bit about going in there to mix it, but at 24 hours, you should be able to smell something. I like to say that the smell kind of reminds me of, that smell after it rains and you're going into the forest for the first time and it's very wet and it smells just mushroomy. You can't see the mushrooms, but you can smell the mushrooms. That's how this smells to me. And in 24 hours, if you can smell, then you know that something is happening. And you can also start to see like little powdered sugar, as I kind of talked about, or very small, fuzzy little grains starting to appear. And that's when you know that your project is almost there. It's successful for now. And so you just got to get it towards, make sure the next 24 hours goes very smoothly. So for me, that means that I go in and I just break it apart to make sure that the heat it's not too hot in there. And I also want to make sure every little corner of my tray, sometimes I do, we're human and human error exists. And sometimes I miss a spot when I'm propagating my spore. So I like to go in there and make sure everything is mixed in very, very well. And then I retray it and put it back into the incubation chamber. And after 48 hours, you get koji. So here's a photo of the early days when I was making my first soy sauce I ever made. I actually used soy and wheat. So all the recipes I actually first starting out was just based on the book. So I did all soy because that's what the book told me to do. So I just followed the recipe. And once I figured I don't want to say master, but once I realized it started working, that's when I started switching out the beans for other types of things that I could source locally. And so, all of this kind of goes back to like for me, the biggest reason why I love doing this is I get to not only use all the mushrooms that I get to find and I in the woods, and I always feel so inspired. Depending on, like this year for example, if for those of you who are going to the MSSF mushroom festival, like this year I made a lion's mane miso because last year I was so inspired in Marin, I hauled out like maybe 20 pounds of hericium. And it was just like every single year when I find a big haul of something, it inspires me for the next season to do something else. And for me, it's like always trying to use what I'm finding and discovering flavor. And what's really interesting is the hericium gets fermented, and a lot of it already tastes very seafood like when you're cooking with it, but fermented, the lion's mane tastes like scallops, like dried, really like dried scallops, and almost like I don't want to say crab, but it's very, very, it's like heightened seafood, um more than what the lion's mane would taste like on its own, which already tastes seafoody. But what's interesting to me is that through fermentation, it actually unlocks or deepens the flavor, which I find very, very cool. And sometimes also surprising. Like today I brought a cordyceps miso. I hope some of you guys tried it. That one to me tasted like pineapples, which I thought was really interesting. Last year I fermented huilacoche, which I thought was really cool. And that also had a pineapple-y taste. So I just started a small R&D batch of a lobster mushroom miso. And I'm curious to see if that tastes like pineapples too, because I kind of have this theory that parasitic mushrooms or something is happening there that makes it taste a little pineapple-y, but I don't know for sure, but it seems like, as I experiment, for me, it's all about discovering flavor. And also like umami for me is the biggest thing because as I'm cooking, I think it's very easy to find things that are sweet, honey, sugar, sour, maybe some lemon or some acidity from vinegar, salt, right? Bitter can sometimes be hard to achieve, but maybe that's not something that people want in their cooking anyways, but it could be delicious if you know how to do it right. I say bitter for me is a little advanced, but like umami for me is the one thing I'm always chasing. And umami to me is this taste or this flavor that makes you want more. And it's hard to find for me, like whether it's, I'm always trying to use like dried mushrooms or seaweed, but miso has been a great way, especially with all these flavors that we have, to add umami to your cooking. And what I recently learned from this picture that I'm showing here is that the reason why we love umami foods is it makes sense, is that as we eat umami foods, it signals to our brain that protein is near. And going back to how comes to be, it's from the breakdown of proteins into amino acids. So it makes a lot of sense that the reason why we love umami foods is because it's a literal signal to our brain that protein is near, I want more. Similar to like, why we love sugar. It's because when we eat sugar, our bodies naturally are like, wow, energy, I want more energy. Give me more energy. That's why I want more sugar. So it's interesting to looking at this picture, like as I'm reading it through, to learn like why our bodies respond to certain things, and why we crave certain things. And, with all of these things that I've been talking about, the most amazing thing that I've been learning is that fermented foods, it's so interesting because there's only a few ingredients. For me, I use I use beans from Rancho Gordo. They're from Napa. So these heirloom beans, I use some sort of bean. I use the Koji that I grow on the rice. And then from there, it's either mushrooms or seasonal produce and some salt. And that's really it. I mean, it's 4 or 5 ingredients. But why is it so good for you? And it's really because all of those ingredients that I'm fermenting already have so many great health benefits, but I talked a little bit about the flavor getting unlocked, but also what's really happening on a deeper level is the nutrients in those ingredients get unlocked because these microbes are pre-digesting all of that food for you. And so what happens is as the microbes are breaking it down and fermenting, it and then you eat it, your body is now absorbing all that pre-digested new things that these microbes have already gone in and broken down for you. So it's just more bioavailable to your body, which I find really interesting about all fermented foods, and why we're starting to realize why fermented foods are so good for us and for our brains. Here I talk a little bit about miso. So I talked a little bit about making koji. So a lot of times people ask me, they don't know what miso is. So here I just kind of quickly talk about what miso is. It's usually like soybeans, rice koji or barley koji, and then salt. But for us, we use a variety of these ingredients. The mushroom misos are one of my favorites, though. I just love mushrooms. So we try to make a lot of those. And this is kind of some photos of the process. So we source the vegetables or we ferment, we source the vegetables from the farmer's market or we forage them ourselves and then we get them, and then we bring them in and we typically roast or cook them down to reduce the water weight. And then we cook the beans up as well. And from there, they get mixed with the koji rice, the roasted vegetables, the salt, the beans. Everything gets mixed and then it gets put into a meat grinder. And then from there, we pack it into a barrel. So that's really the whole process. And here is the bird's eye view of how it looks like in the barrel. You can see the fist marks there. And the reason why we pound it in is because air pockets are actually what causes mold. So when you're packing and fermenting, at least miso, you want to make sure that there are no air pockets because that's what causes contamination. And then a few months, depending if it's a short-term miso, a long-term miso, this is what it looks like bird's eye view from the top when you're harvesting. All that liquid is actually the original soy sauce. It's the tamari that I was I talked about the original soy sauce, but the original soy sauce really is tamari. It's a liquid trapped in the beans and the rice, and in our case, the mushrooms that get pressed over time. And what's happening is because it's alive, it's creating its own CO2. And as it's breathing, it's generating all this air and this energy, and it pushes out all of the liquid, especially with the salt in there as well. It just pushes out all of the salt and pushes out all the liquid and then rises to the top. And then we collect that. So during the fungus fair, if you guys are interested, feel free. I always have samples of everything and you can try it. And people who've never tried miso tamari before they're always really shocked because it tastes completely different to anything that you've ever tried before. And there are different types of misos. This kind of just quickly goes over the different types. White misos are probably what most people are very familiar with. And the reason why it's white is because it's mostly koji rice. And it's fermented for a shorter period of time. And there's less salt in there. And this is all traditional types of misos. And I do my own take on it. But this is traditionally how it's done. Yellow misos are right in between white and reds. They're fermented for a little bit more time and they have a higher percentage of salt. And the red misos have the highest amount of beans in it. And that's actually why they're red misos, is because the reason why they're red is because the protein in the soybeans have fermented for such a long period of time that it's the Maillard reaction. All the proteins over time start breaking down and turning this really, really dark color. And they are fermented for 8 months or longer, and they have a higher salt percentage. And then hacho misos are something that's very rare, and it's only because the koji is just grown on the beans and it's not fermented with anything else. So the yield is much lower when you just make a miso made with koji alone and you don't feed it anything else. But those misos are very, very, very umami. And actually this year we're coming out with our own hacho miso. It's something that we made in our house like maybe 4 years ago that we're going to release it, but it's like the last soybean product that we've ever made. It's a very small batch, but yeah, we try to experiment with all sorts of things. So maybe the next hacho miso I make will be with a butter bean or something else, but this was like, we made this a long time ago. So finally tasted it the other day and it tastes amazing. It's very like beefy, which is interesting. But it makes sense because it's been fermented for a long period of time, and I've only grown it on soybeans alone. And soybeans actually have the highest percentage of protein. So here are some photos of the misos that we make. We ferment like a chanterelle mushroom one. We do a honey nut squash now that it's honey nut squash season. But yeah, the reason why they're white is because they actually have a higher rice concentration, but I also pick beans that are high in starch, or I pick vegetables that are high in starch, which turns into sugar. So it's very sweet. And then these are examples of yellow style misos. Last year, if you guys were at MSSF, the Fungus Fair, I was doing tastings of the matsutake. I didn't make this year, but I still made the shiitake katsubushi. So katsubushi is fermented dried tuna, basically. It's like bonito flakes or dashi kind of. Bonito it's the primary ingredient in dashi, but it's very umami. So I'll have that to sample this year. It was so popular, but the shiitake katsubushi is delicious. But these ones are made in 3 months time, and equal amounts of beans and koji rice. And at MSSF during the Fungus Fair, I'll be doing a hands-on class where we'll actually make something, and then I'll have all my recipes there for people if they're interested. And these are red style miso, so I ferment these for a longer period of time. Most of you guys might have tried it by now, but the morel mushroom miso I've been making for the longest time. And this one's fermented for 8 to 9 months and very, very umami. And the reason why it's so umami is because it's fermented for a longer period of time, but I also add a little bit more chickpeas and I add a lot of morels in there. So the morels actually get broken down, and I think it's a delicious flavor. So yeah. And then lastly, I have a few slides on miso tamari. I talked a little bit about this. So I hope you guys during the Fungus Fair can come out and try it. But, it's pretty rare because you can see on the top, there's actually not much. So like for every 350 pounds, for the morel mushroom, I get 45 bottles. That's because mushrooms are 80% water, and so that's a very high yield. But some of the other ferments that I do, like there's just not as much. So I actually try to save as much tamari as I can to bring to the fungus fair because it's just delicious. But this is the bird's eye view. And then soy sauce is also grown very similarly to well, it's kind of the same process as it's the same process for growing the koji, but here you'll see like we steam the lentils and then we toast the quinoa. We put it on this big tray and then we inoculate similar to this is the same setup of how we grow the koji rice. And then from there we tray it. And in 48 hours you get lentil and quinoa koji, and then that goes into a brine where it's 10% salt basically. So if it's let's say if this was 100 grams of substrate, it would go into a 10% brine. So we'd add 10, so that recipe pretty much scales no matter what. So yeah, that's kind of the whole process. So here, I mean, some of you guys have already tasted it, but I brought a quarter set miso for you guys. And for those of you who are tuning in online, come find me at the Fungus Fair and we'll have plenty of mushroom misos to try. I think this year we're gonna have chanterelle mushroom, shiitake katsubushi, morel mushroom, lion's mane, and cordyceps. So that should be a pretty good lineup to bring for the Fungus Fair. Yeah. And here's a little recipe chart. I talked a lot about making these products, but those of you are at home and want to take a screenshot of this, I only work in ratios. I don't really use recipes. I always just think about ratios. So like if you want to make a miso, for example, at home, I just do like 1-to-1 and then 5 to 15% salt. And then the inclusion of like the roasted mushrooms or the roasted vegetables are never higher than 15%. So in all of my misos, it's mostly just actually koji rice and the bean. But if you think about the mushrooms, even though my percentage is 15%, that's it cooked down to nothing. So mushrooms, as you guys know, are 80% water. So when you dry roast it or you dry saute it, it's basically the pan has to be completely dry before they get put into the ferment. So that 15% of the inclusion that I add into the recipe is a lot, the initial weight is a lot higher depending on what I'm using. And it just concentrates the flavor when you're roasting or dry sauteing. Then that's it. And here are some amazing resources that you guys can, all these books are actually available at the library. So I would recommend that before buying anything. I know that I used to go to the library for everything. I still do, but I always go to the library first, and then I get it sent to my local library, and I pick it up there and I read it. And if I really, really like it, then I'll try to find it at a bookstore and buy it there. So, that's it. Yeah, questions? Oh yeah, yeah. So at the Fungus Fair, I'm doing workshop. I don't know how many seats. 30. Okay, so I don't know how many tickets we have left, but there are supposedly, I think there's room for 30 people. We already sold some tickets. So how can people find tickets do you just go on MSSF on the website and you can buy tickets? Okay, yeah. So you can go on the website and buy tickets on the Eventbrite, and it should be really fun. I always do a mushroom miso for the class. And depending on last year I did black trumpets. So that was really fun. So it kind of depends on what I find. Because you know, just whatever is in season, whatever I find. Maybe it's Hericium this year. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
You use dried mushrooms instead of fresh?
Yeah, so I actually, for all of my mushroom products, I only use dried mushrooms because dried mushrooms have more flavor. If you can imagine, a dried shiitake smells so much better than a fresh shiitake. And dried mushrooms are also a great way to be able to make these products all year round. I don't have to just depend on going to the farmer's market. And so, yeah, I usually use dried mushrooms, but what I do is I always rehydrate and cook them really, really well, especially for mushrooms that have more chitin in them, like the morel mushrooms. I make sure the morel mushroom miso, I cook those morels down like no other because I don't want anybody having any digestion issues. But Yeah, I get the dried mushrooms. Or even if I forage them fresh, I actually clean them really, really well. The problem with the wild mushrooms or making a mushroom miso is that a lot of the wild stuff, it's dirty. So like if you were to find like a chanterelle mushroom, and they're the big mud puppies, I spray them down super well, almost to the point where they're waterlogged. And then I leave them on a towel to dry for a few days. And from there, that's when they get put in the dehydrator to really fully dry. So then when I'm making my mushroom miso, what ends up happening is the product is already so clean that I can just put it in the pot and just immediately rehydrate and cook down. But the wild mushrooms that I source, in addition to the ones I forage for our batches, come from Far West Fungi, and sometimes they're not so clean. So what I do is I soak them in water, especially like the morels. Those can get really, really dirty, and I soak them multiple times and change out the water. And then from there, I even use like a spray. The spray nozzle works really well to get into the crevices. And then from there, they get they get dried sauteed, or yeah, the morels actually get dried sauteed before they get put into the batch. Yeah. Yeah, so all the soy sauces are gluten free, and it's funny that I didn't do that on purpose. I actually, when I was coming up with the name for the business, Shared Cultures, I was envisioning a brand that used different ingredients from different cultures to create something that was just flavor. I guess because I talked a little bit about it earlier, but growing up as Asian American, I never really thought of soy sauce as maybe like an Asian thing. I just thought it was like ketchup, salt, pepper, Worcestershire sauce. I never knew it was Asian until I went to a more Americanized public school in San Francisco, because I went to private school pretty much until middle school. And then when I went to a public school, and I was suddenly like, wow, there's so many diversities and so many different types of cultures. And I remember eating lunch one day and someone was like, oh, you're having Asian food today. And I was like, I didn't know this was Asian food. Like, I just thought it was my food, you know? And from there, when I was envisioning making the soy sauce, I just wanted to use different types of ingredients to make this soy sauce, because I wanted to make something that was a little bit more cross-cultural. Like if you switched out the beans and you didn't use soy and wheat, is it still Asian? If I use lentils and quinoa that are typically not Asian ingredients. So that was kind of like the whole idea behind that one product. And also why I really like our name Shared Cultures, because it's like a play on that, but also a play on the fact that these are live cultured foods. So we're sharing those with people. But also, like Kevin and I come from Asian backgrounds, and it seemed really cool to be able to like literally share our culture with other people, but on our own spin, if you will, of who we are as like Asian Americans, and living in San Francisco and being surrounded by all this wonderful food, and produce that we have here. Yeah.
Koji rice tastes by itself, and it tastes interesting as you cook it at that stage.
Yeah.
You know, seaweed, you see.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question was, what does koji rice taste like on its own? And then the second question was, have we foraged seaweed by itself and used that? So the first answer to the first question is, it tastes koji rice in itself tastes very sweet, because when you taste it, the koji has already started to break down the starches in the rice into sugar. So if you find me at MSSF at the Fungus Fair or sign up for the class, I always ask people to taste the rice by itself first, because that's an experience on its own. And also, I think people are really taken aback because they're like, oh, I have to eat moldy rice? Like, that's weird, but also really cool. And everybody in class is very excited about it. But it is it's very sweet. And then, yeah, the first batch we have a kombu garlic miso. And the first few batches, I used to forage the kombu myself. But then as you start growing, things become it just is not sustainable. I used to go down to Pescadero and get the kombu myself, and do that. But now we source the kombu commercially. But as we've been growing, I've been thinking a lot about those things and why this last year we started doing something called like special projects where we charge a little bit more for our products, but they're very small batch and they are special projects that take actually more time to do, but it allows me to have that creativity. So an example of this is that we just released like a Japanese curry miso that I was really excited about. I roasted potatoes, carrots, and onions, bases of a Japanese curry. And I actually chose soybeans on purpose because soy is very important to Japanese culture. And I ferment it with curry powder. And that tasted amazing. And then we also released a Thai chili and mung bean miso. So made with coriander root. So coriander root is actually cilantro root and it's very, very it's used a lot in Thai cooking. So we roasted the coriander root, fermented Thai chili, the bird eye chilies, and we use mung beans, which is very popular in Thai cuisine to kind of tell a story. So, and then next month, I'm actually releasing a Three Sisters miso, which I'm really excited about. So, people who are not familiar with Three Sisters, it's a native culture. They grow the beans. And the corn and the squash together. And all of it, it's like, I don't know, I would have to, I can't remember off the top of my head, but one's like a nitrogen fixer. One helps create like the framework for the corn stalks, create the framework for the beans to grow. And then squash comes in later. It's like this very beautiful story. And I was able to, Steve from Rancho Gordo actually let me know that they had the bean that the native people used to grow. It's called the hidatsa bean, I believe, and we were able to source a very, very small amount of this bean, and so I was able to put all those things together and create this miso, and it tastes incredible. So it's like stuff like that takes more time because it's not only time consuming to make on such a small scale, but also to source the ingredients is a lot of work. But what's fun about the special projects is it just allows you to do some things that are more creative. Like eventually I would like to go back to foraging my own seaweed. That was really, really fun, but unsustainable if you want to make 450 pounds of your own batch. So
You have a question on Zoom too.
yeah. Oh, I don't know. Okay, I have a question on Zoom. Can you give some ideas for main dish or appetizer dish recipes that cooks might seek out if they're interested in using your products to best advantage as an ingredient in their meals? In other words, what do you do with your miso other than make miso soup? Okay, that's a great question. So actually, we just launched our new website. I can quickly, I don't know if can you see it? Yes. Okay, I'm just gonna go here. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so this is this we just launched on Shopify. So I'm really excited about this. We were on Wix for a very long time. We built everything ourselves on Wix when we first started, and we just launched on Shopify. It's been a 2-year project, but we finally made it, and this is has all the recipes. So I feel like the website is like 80% there. I'm 80% happy with it. There's still a lot of things that I would like to fix, but one thing at a time. But the most important thing is I have a new website. We're on Shopify, and I have all these recipes that people always ask me about. So I actually categorize them by the type of miso. Somebody the other day was like, "Oh, you should categorize them by the miso flavor," and I was like, "I hear you, but." It's just, like one thing at a time. One day I'm gonna get a filter on this thing. But if you click through, there's some really great, amazing, like this one I love to make, this butter bean, the soup, especially now that it's getting um cold, So putting like miso in soup is a really great idea. I actually made today for lunch. I This Thursday I'm doing a workshop at my facility. So I do workshops at my facility in Patrol Hill, and I'm doing a cordyceps miso. But I'm also adding habanada peppers. So for those of you who are not familiar with habanada peppers, they're habanero peppers that have been genetically grown to have no heat. So it's all the flavor of a habanero, but zero heat. So for Halloween, for October, I wanted to do something like, I don't want to say it's spooky, but cordyceps seems like very on the nose for Halloween, but also like I wanted to scare people with like, oh, we're fermenting habaneros, but no, we're not. We're fermenting habanadas. But anyways, I digress. The reason why I tell you this is because I was preparing the cordyceps in advance for that class, cooking the cordyceps down. And what I did was I never throw the mushroom water away. So I use the mushroom water, and I always have frozen beans in my freezer because when I'm making miso, I always make extra beans for myself to eat. So I threw the frozen deli, the frozen container of chickpeas that I had into the cordyceps broth, let that cook down for a little bit. And then I added a scoop of miso in there. And that alone was already delicious. But I added a little bit of just like dried espelette peppers. You can use any type of pepper, and a little bit of olive oil because I think fat helps add a little bit of flavor. And I had some Thai basil that I got from the farmer's market. Then I sprinkled on top, and that was my little. I just tried to make use of that mushroom water, and that was a meal that took less than 5 minutes to make. And from there, I actually had a little bit left, and I actually have a stick blender. So I blended it. And then tomorrow I'll have I'm going to use it as a dip. So actually, I'm going to roast a little bit of squash that I have sitting in my pantry right now or from the farmer's market. I'm going to roast the squash, and then I'm going to just until it's tender, and I'm going to mix that blended soup thing that I made with the squash that I'm going to roast, and I'm going to use that as like a hummus, tomorrow for like a pita situation with yeah. So there's like so many ways to use miso, but the website here hopefully is helpful. I mean, there's obvious ways like the mushroom, like a miso nabe, like for miso soup, but you can make Rice Krispies. And then I also have a recipe for like cod, like miso cod. And there's so much. So you can oh, this one's actually one of my favorite recipes. This heirloom tomato miso tofu whip. My friend is a chef, and he came up with this recipe. He basically blended the miso with tofu. So a lot of you guys might be vegan. So this is a really good one. He blended the tofu with miso and added a little bit of salt and olive oil to create like this really nice, like he calls it miso whip that he put on the bottom. And I know that it's tomato season is now slowly ending, but you could think about using squash, for example, or anything else, right? That's just like the bottom of the base. So there's some really cool recipes on here that we worked really hard on. So hopefully you can check that out. Alan, did you have a question?
Oh, I was going to ask follow up on the kombu miso. I wonder how much of a miso bomb does that become?
Miso bomb?
Yeah, I mean, the
flavor?
already has.
Yeah, no, that one's
not miso.
umami bomb. Yeah, no, it's a lot. It's the umami is a lot in the kombu garlic because the garlic has umami in it. And the kombu, when you dry it, I never get rid of that white powder because that's the flavor right there. I mean, I still remember the first kombu miso I made. I not only dried everything, I did this silly thing where I dried the kombu in the dehydrator because that's how I've always seen it. And then I realized I had to cut the damn thing. And I was like, wow, I really should have just cut it first and then dehydrated it. But I wasn't, there are a lot of things that you don't know until you do it. And you're like, wow, that was stupid. But that was the first batch that I ever made. But that one is really, really good. And definitely one of our like top sellers for sure. I think the kombu, it's funny because my favorite misos are like the ones that are not what you expect. Like the corn miso that we make is really delicious because the starch in the corn turns into sugar. So it's very, very, it's like it's so good because what you're tasting is corn amplified, right? But And like a lot of the mushroom ones, like the cordyceps, I find are delicious. But sometimes when I'm selling to the general public, people tend to like the kombu garlic or the black garlic or like the more safer options because I think that's what they know and love. But for me, or they what they know and are familiar with, it's kind of like when you go into Trader Joe's and you see something and it's like, oh, I'm familiar with that, but that's new. So you get really excited about it because there's an area of familiarity. But for me, I get more excited about like the things that are super weird because I feel like, wow, I've never tasted that before. And for me, it's like when you go to it's the same feeling I get when I walk into a farmer's market and I see things that I've never used before, but I want to try it and I want to ask like the farmer, what is this? How do I use it? Because then once you taste a new flavor, for me, it's like chasing inspiration. It's like trying to like taste something new for the first time and you feel excited about like what you're going to make with it. So that's how I feel about my products and why I gravitate usually more towards the weirder stuff. But for other people, I can see why like kombu garlic, it's just if you're going to buy one thing, sometimes people are just like, if I'm going to just buy one thing, they want to buy something that they're going to use every single day, which I totally understand. But there are other people that, you know, want to buy multiple things and then they'll try like the other flavors that are a little bit more out there. So, yeah.
Follow up with that thought, do you ever try something that's very strange and weird that kind of fail or one project that you try?
Yeah.
And every time you mentioned earlier, you signed up for, like Koji to protein, like animal protein. Have you ever tried any projects like that?
Yeah.
Soon animal protein take over the protein part of it.
Yeah. So the question is like, if I ever tried something that was weird that failed, and if I ever tried fermenting animal protein. So the most recent thing that I did that failed, it's so funny, was an ube miso. So I got fresh ube from the farmer's market, and for those of you who are familiar or think they know what ube is, it's like a starchy potato. It's very purple. But everything that you get here that's made with ube, it's like a very like Trader Joe's has it, for example. They have the ube pancake mochi mix. It is the most artificial thing you will ever taste, but it's delicious. It's delicious, you know? But when people think about ube, they think about this like ube to me tastes like vanilla and coconut flavor. It's delicious, but it's never real. It's always artificial. So when I saw this box of ube at the farmer's market, I was so excited. And I paired it with azuki beans, like Japanese red dessert beans, because I wanted it to be a dessert. I knew I wanted it to be a sweet miso right away. And what was really interesting was I did the same thing the following 2 weeks later, I actually saw fresh taro at the farmer's market. Taro is not as rare. I feel like taro is pretty, you can find it. But I thought, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to do the same experiment with ube and taro and and everything is the same except the only variable is the ube and the taro are the two variables that are different. So I did the exact same recipe for both because I bought them like 2 weeks apart. And I just it's been over 2 years. And the reason why it's been over 2 years was I kept hoping it would get better, but it has gotten worse every single year, the ube miso. So I actually, if you go on my Instagram page, I actually just did a video about it, maybe last week, and I actually threw 50 pounds away. It was really sad. That's my small batch. When I do a special projects, I usually do 50 pounds. The Japanese curry and the Thai chili that I made recently, I only did like maybe 15 pounds, but that when I just got so excited about a whole case of ube, and it completely tasted like it just rancid and sour, and every year just got progressively worse. But what's really interesting is the taro tastes amazing. So the taro I will be actually releasing next in a few months' time in November. But the taro tastes amazing. But why did the ube taste horrible? And so a few weeks ago, I went to a fermentation conference at Stanford, and this was prior to me opening the ube miso and realizing it tasted like I actually didn't even ask that question. I asked a food scientist. Her name is Ariel Johnson. She wrote this book called Flavor Rama. She's an amazing food scientist. And I asked her why certain things taste different during fermentation. And gosh, I have it in my notes somewhere. But she said that and the reason why I asked her that question was because I recently fermented lemon peels, just the rind on the outside, and it tasted amazing. So I made a lemon peel miso using just the outside, the zest. And I was curious because zest does not have starch or protein. So I was curious why it tasted so amazing, like evolved. And I was just asking her, and she said because certain ingredients have different chemical properties in them, like flavors that don't get unlocked unless enzymes have gone in there to unlock it for you. So there's no way to access these flavors unless only microbes can go in there on a microscopic level and break down and digest whatever's in there so that we can then access those flavors. And so that was really, really interesting to me. So I've learned now why things like lemon zest, which does not have starch or protein in my obvious eyes, like why those taste amazing. So that gives me a new perspective as I go into the farmer's market to now even ferment. I used to only really look for things that had starch and protein, but now I'm like thinking outside of beyond that because I feel like there's more to learn. And the thing that and so that also ties into the ube, why it went wrong, but then the taro it turned out okay. And actually, when I posted on Instagram, a lot of other chefs commented and said that theirs turned out disgusting as well. So it wasn't just me, because I thought I was going to replicate the experiment one more time just to make sure that it was, but it turns out that other people said that they had the same effect. And the one animal thing that I have done, or meaty thing that I've done, well, one is the shiitake katsubushi because that has dried fish in it. But the second one that I've done is when I go to the farmer's market, I usually buy rotisserie chicken. In San Francisco, there's a company called Roli Roti. They do these rotisserie chickens at the farmer's market. I usually buy them every week. And I always eat all the chicken meat first, and then I make stock from the bones. I always make chicken stock. And from there, the last step a few years ago was I actually fermented the bones with Koji because I figured there was a lot of marrow in there and the bones had been roasted. So there's a lot of flavor. And then they've been boiled. So they're very, very soft now. And so the third step I figured was I would just run it through a meat grinder and turn it into a miso. And I actually, I still might have some in my house. I haven't tasted it in over a year, but last year I tasted it and it still tasted fine. It doesn't go bad. But it tastes like what's really interesting is the Koji broke everything down, even the bones. So it tastes like pate. And what's really interesting is year after year, the bones seem to get finer and finer. Because I remember the first year I tried it, it was really gritty in my mouth. And then it's been maybe 4 years now, and yeah, and the last year I tried it, it gets sandier and sandier. So it feels like it's slowly decomposing more and more. And I've had a few chefs try it, and it's pretty cool. There's a chef at a restaurant called Birdsong in San Francisco that has like 2 Michelin stars. They do a lot of charcuterie and things, and they also do a lot of Koji ferments in-house. And I let Chris try this, and I think they're doing something similar now because they have so much bones that it's just like the whole point of like when you're having a restaurant is like you're wanting to minimize waste, which is really, really important, but you're also trying to create new flavors. So what's interesting is when you can ferment your waste at a restaurant, that's really, really cool because it's almost like a closed loop system where, and it's like I think that's the most you can do to honor the ingredients that you're getting. So, and even for us, like we are almost as a fermentation business for the first, I mean, for the first 4 years, 5 years of our business, we didn't even pay for trash service because when you're fermenting everything, everything is calculated to the gram. And so there's really no waste. The only waste that you have are the ingredients that fall on the floor during production and also the gloves that you wear, you know, for food safety. That's the only thing I feel bad about is the amount of gloves I go through sometimes for a batch. But there's so much work that goes into it that I hate to contaminate it with like, even if I clean my hands obsessively, maybe there's some like dirt from mushroom foraging or something that gets into the batch then contaminates it. So that's the only thing that I feel bad about. But even then, like for the first 5 years, we never paid for trash service. And even now, we don't really pay for trash. We really only pay for recycling. And we have a very small bag of trash that we bring home every day from production because there really isn't any waste that happens. And that's what's really lovely about fermentation is you use everything. So yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Elena.